Playfulness is a state of being that we can bring to absolutely any situation. Playfulness allows us to reduce stress, reduce anxiety, increase our tolerance of uncertainty, and find more solutions. Playfulness revolves around three main pillars. And if we're high in these three pillars, we're a highly playful individual. In highly stressed state, we tend to narrow our focus, i.e. we're less accepting of bringing in new information, which for decision-making is highly dangerous because now we're essentially running with a blindfold on. Models of leadership are outdated, hangovers from the industrial era, digging into efficiency and reducing variability. Playful leadership welcomes back the human. You can actually even start talking about person-centered leadership or human-centric leadership without understanding playfulness.
Hi, and welcome to Metaconscious Leaders, where we seek always with our guests to discover new and diverse insights that have the power to enhance our understanding of reality and our leadership in times of monumental change, challenge, and opportunity. Whether we're thrown off center by the apparent chaos, or whether we master a state of leadership that is centered and wise, will determine how we perform as leaders. One sure thing, though, is that old leadership models need urgent updating. We need to be open to new and even radical insights that will enable us to harness the energy of this moment to create a better, more enlightened future. With this very much in mind, I'm delighted to introduce Chris Marshall as our guest today, because he's going to be sharing with us the importance of playfulness in helping organizations to think more clearly, collaborate more effectively, and adapt more confidently in fast-changing environments, establishing a mindset that enhances decision-making, learning, and resilience. With an eye also on geopolitics, I'm also wondering where the limits are. Chris is founder of the Playfulness Lab, a community interest company that works with leaders, teams, and organizations to reintroduce play, creativity, and aliveness into learning and leadership, not as something frivolous, but as a technology that is both deeply practical and deeply human. Chris is a behavioral scientist, applied psychologist, performance coach, and former elite athlete whose work explores how humans think, feel, and adapt in times of disruption. So welcome, Chris, to Metaconscious Leaders, and thank you very much for being our guest today.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Greg. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you. And just picking up on that introduction, I love the use of the word aliveness you've brought out there already, because I think that's going to be something which probably comes up time and time again throughout our conversation and wherever we take this, whether it's geopolitics or organizations or teams or resiliency. I'm sure we'll touch on it all. But no, thank you for inviting me.
So before we get into the fascinating topic of playfulness, will you give us a bit of backstory? How did you get into the playfulness game?
Yeah, absolutely. Might be a pleasure to. So for me, I often trace this back to being a really anxious ski racer. I was about 15 years old, maybe 14 years old. I just managed to get myself onto the British children's team, so kind of the first rung on the ladder of international competition. And I could train up there with the best of them, but come race day, nerves would actually get the better of me. Not the greatest recipe to be the best ski racer, but fortuitously, essentially that led into me working with one of the world's best performance psychologists, an American guy. And what that opened my eyes to was, up until that point, everything I'd done was about how much time I'd spent in the gym, how much time I'd spent on the slopes, how well I'd waxed my skis or whatever else I was trying to do. And all of a sudden, this psychological game came into it. And I remember it hitting me like a train, just going, oh my word, I've missed half the game. And from then, I think that was kind of the launch pad moment of always seeing the world through that. There is always the tangible part that we interact with, but then there's also this psychological part of how we perceive it, how we appreciate it, how we assess it, the psychology of how we approach a situation or environment. And so that was the start. And then it really kind of, I retired as a young athlete. I came into finance really off the back of not really knowing what to do, and ended up with one of the big global banks weeks before the great financial crisis. Obviously, at that point, I had no idea the great financial crisis was going to happen. And when you read through transcripts, neither did most of the leaders in the world either. But what it
2008.
taught me,
So
yeah,
2008 this was.
2007, 2008, yeah.
Yeah.
And what I saw there was, I essentially describe it as I almost had front row seats for this roller coaster ride, because it was a crisis around credit. It was a crisis which involved banks. And there I saw something very similar to my days as an athlete. There was a huge bifurcation in how people responded to the disruption, the chaos, the free fall of investment markets. And that brought me all the way back to the psychology side. And so shortly after that, I remained in finance, still work an awful lot in finance today. But also it kind of got me into this idea of going, okay, well, I want to understand far more about decision making under stress, about decision making in extreme chaos, in extreme pressure situations outside of military and sport, because that's where most of performance psychology has come from. And so I went to do a behavioral master's, so behavioral science, looking at financial decision making. I was looking at resiliency and mental toughness, two concepts I was very, very familiar with from my days as an athlete, and bringing them into the financial arena and really trying to assess, do those concepts actually work within the investment space and within investment teams or even retail investors? So that was kind of the first foray. And really from there, the psychology side has spread. I then went to look at things like resiliency, mental toughness in terms of post-traumatic growth. We're very familiar in kind of common society talking about post-traumatic stress. But post-traumatic growth is also another feature of being human, and it's one of the possible responses to trauma.
Mm.
Um, and so that took me into psychotherapy, that took me into coaching. I've worked with complex trauma, I've worked with extreme trauma. I continue to work with individuals on a performance basis. Through that journey, and I'm going to cut this short, otherwise this is going to take up the whole of your podcast. Through that journey, one of the things I realized, and I guess it was again through one of my own kind of in more introspective moments, I I was kind of looking at my own energy levels, my own. I was on the verge of burnout and actually went into burnout. I hospitalized myself for 3 days with all of these different kind of projects going on and everything else. And there was a real irony lying in that hospital bed. And the irony was, I was a researcher of mental toughness and resiliency, two of the things that we hold as the gold standard, which protect you from burnout. Um, and I suddenly sat there going, I must be missing something here. And it was that moment I was then absolutely fired up to go, do you know what? I need to find out what the bit is missing. I now kind of say resiliency and mental toughness are wonderful. They are things and constructs which through coaching I help individuals find. And if people can build that in their lives, it makes a huge difference.
Mm.
However, they're not the gold standard when it comes to chaos and disruption. Certainly chaos and disruption,
Mm.
which has a more kind of long-term feel to it. Short-term events, mental toughness and resiliency, where you just plow into the wall ahead of you, where you remain flint-headed, you muscle down, you don't give up, you persevere, is brilliant for acute kind of stress situations, high performance as athletes, military campaigns, essentially wherever you get an off season. When you come into most people's version of stress, it's far more chronic, i.e., the stresses are ongoing. If you're an entrepreneur, a leader, unfortunately, you don't go, okay, well, here's competition season for a week and then I'll take a few weeks off. It's every day. And the missing piece I found was the most resilient individuals. And when you go back through all the kind of resiliency academic literature, you start to find this come out. The most resilient individuals are the most adaptable. Adaptability comes from this ability to be able to stand back from a situation. And I'm going to introduce this word, which is the key topic, and play with reality. to find alternative solutions, to find alternative meanings, to reorientate, to reframe. Sometimes in the playfulness research, we talk about kind of this idea of lemonading. So it's not rose tinted glasses. You're not looking out at the world going, oh, well, I'll ignore reality and I'll just pretend it's brilliant. You're able to look at the information and the situation in front of you and essentially find the best of it, to find the silver lining of the cloud you're in, or to reframe it, or to find the solutions which are always around us. We just tend to be so engulfed by what's going on, we miss them. And so I'm sure we'll go into kind of more of what playfulness is, but that's what led me there was the kind of a very long period of time, maybe 10, 15 years of looking at mental toughness and resiliency, and finally working out that while they're important and brilliant concepts, they're not the full story of human capability. Human capability can go beyond being rigid. And once we get to that place of flexibility and adaptability, we then also harness all these wonderful things like creativity, being able to respond in the moment and not just simply plowing ahead into a brick wall.
It's fascinating because the most powerful models, if you like, or techniques arise from people who have lived experience and have been through the the grit and the grind, and they've had to discover it for themselves in their own lived experience, as I said, um, and then figured out what it is that makes the difference, and
Yes.
be able to model that for other people. I think that's wonderful. Um, okay, so play. What is it? Because play means very different things to different people, doesn't it? Or if you just say, "Hey,
Absolutely.
let's be playful," in a boardroom, we're going to introduce a little bit of playfulness. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, and normally you're absolutely right. When you introduce that word, depending on the team who's in front of you, you normally get half the team absolutely cringe in their seat, just going, "Oh my word, we're going to get made to, I don't know, build spaghetti towers with marshmallows or something." I could throw a whole load of other team building exercises under the bus here, but our common perception of both playfulness and play, well, we don't tend to think of them as different. We tend to think of them as kind of the same thing, play and playfulness. Um, Most people see playfulness as something childish, as something maybe letting your hair down at the end of serious work, maybe a lot of humor, joking around, being a little bit silly. You wouldn't normally, or most people don't initially put it in terms of innovation, performance, resiliency. Um, it's something that we kind of shoehorn into the very corner of our free time when we've completed the rest of our to-do list. I.e., if I get everything done today, I will make sure I have half an hour to let my hair down and be playful once the serious work is over.
Right.
In actual fact, and kind of what playfulness is and what play is a really, really hard question to answer. And academia has tried to answer it for a few hundred years. We are probably getting slightly closer. So my current PhD is in playfulness and resiliency. And what's fascinating is when you start looking through all those academic literature, you start to have to expand your vision of what you think play is. So as I said, the common perception is all about games and silliness and lightness and humor. Actually, where we start to find it is it's ambiguous. The closer you get to it, the tighter the grip, actually the more it just seeps through your fingers. And that's because play shows up in nearly all human functioning or kind of well-being, actually. So stories are a form of play, i.e., they're not real. We're, we're telling a story and we're imagining something. So now we get to imagination. Metaphors are a form of playfulness. When we go to the cinema, it's a form of playfulness. When we tell a joke, absolutely, that's play. The issue is that because we feel it's such a narrow thing, and this weird things happens as we age, is that we know how important it is as kids to the point that we bake it into the national curriculum because we know that play is highly linked to social development, emotional development, physical development.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in that kind of progression to adulthood, and I've got my own parents' voice in my head going on here, kind of get Christopher, get your head down. It's time to get serious, stop mucking around. These kind of common phrases that we've all been told at some point is essentially a command to put away the ways of being a kid, being childish, being at play, and to be at work, to adopt seriousness. I'm going to kind of offer you just a very simple way of thinking about play and playfulness. I actually now, with most people, characterize play as an activity. I think this is the easiest way to get our heads around it. So, play is when we're playing a game, fooling around, having a joke with friends, playing a game of football, playing a game of Monopoly, whatever you want to do. It's an activity. Playfulness, the way I kind of put it across, this is where we get into it being a mindset or a state, or actually how our nervous system is firing if we really want to get down to the neuroscience of it. And so now we see that playfulness is something different to an activity. It's the
Yeah.
way we start approaching things. It's the way that we're thinking about what's going on. It's the way we're experiencing actually.
Yeah.
It's not just a conscious effort of, oh, I must remember to be playful. I'm in a stressful situation. Let me find some alternative solutions. Actually, when you're in a state of playfulness, you naturally find alternatives. You naturally
Yeah.
reorientate. And so I think that's the simplest way of kind of parsing the two apart. Play, as a rule of thumb, play is an activity, something we get involved in, something that maybe we do at the end of work. Playfulness, however, is a state of being that we can bring to absolutely any situation. Actually, weirdly, and we'll probably get into this, it shows up in the therapy room. It shows up in the coaching conversations. It shows
Yeah.
up in, uh, we could talk about gallows humor as a form of playfulness where soldiers are facing imminent, probably nearly 100% likelihood of death. Playfulness allows us to actually just calm things down inside and to find that space, find that gap
Mm.
between reality and something just above, which allows us to reduce stress, reduce anxiety, increase our tolerance of chaos and uncertainty,
Mm.
and find more solutions.
Thinking about this earlier, I was and thinking about the word playfulness. I had myself going play and fullness, and exactly as you were describing there, play is one thing. Fullness is a state. It's
Yes.
something that's all embracing, um, and it has a whole lot of qualities that you described there. So that's beautiful. What are the core components of play
Oh, okay. Um,
that you focus on? Because I
yeah,
know
okay.
that you have a few, Chris, like curiosity, for instance.
Yeah, so I have a model of playfulness. So again, leaving play to one side for a second. Um, Playfulness to me revolves around these kind of three main pillars. And if we're high in these three pillars, we're a highly playful individual. And actually, if you start applying it to teams, what seems to be coming through, from, at least with the kind of the teams I've been working with, is that you also find that if they're high in these three pillars, they're a highly playful team. And so the three pillars, just to kind of run through them. So we have curiosity, creativity, and connectedness. And to kind of just give your audience kind of a little bit of a flavor of each without getting too bogged down in exactly what all these terms mean. Curiosity is really the way I frame this is normally the joy of discovery. And so you're being drawn into something that has grabbed your attention. We know that kind of we all have biases in our decision making, i.e., once we have made up our mind about something, confirmation bias is probably one of the biggest ones. We just go around finding supporting evidence for our decision.
Yeah.
Curiosity it constantly shows up as a way of reducing bias. Because essentially, what curiosity is going is okay, this is reality as I understand it now. I'm curious about what I don't know. And that's a form of playfulness, kind of flipping things round, of just going, okay, well, what don't I know? So joy of discovery is key to playfulness. The next one, creativity, I think is probably the one which most people expect to be in there. So this is creating things which are novel. It shows up in art. It shows up in kind of all human expression,
Mm.
um, but also that innovation piece, that tinkering, that tweaking, the iterations that go on behind kind of product design, or an author writing a book that writes a paragraph and then edits it and edits it. That's a form of creativity.
Mm.
Um, so that one's probably quite self-explanatory. The connectedness is the one which I think probably is most surprising to people. And connectedness, I used that term because I wanted to capture both intrapersonal intelligence and intrapersonal intelligence. So kind of the connection with myself and the connection between others.
Yeah.
Um, and that's key because when we kind of look at kind of where playfulness shows up. So I'm very much in the camp that playfulness is we have this wonderful stress response. And sorry, I'm kind of I will come back to your original question.
No,
We'll do
it's
this
good.
by
It's
the
it, it
way. Is we have this wonderful thing called a stress response, and it's why you and me are here. It's why the human race is here, because in times of high danger, life-threatening danger, we want to be stressed, i.e., we don't want to be playful. And I'm purposely putting these two on a spectrum
we
because
need to be stressed.
we do,
Do you?
absolutely,
Yeah.
because it invokes fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses, survival mechanisms,
Yeah.
which are designed to either p- preserve us in that moment or attack whatever is coming at us.
Yeah.
And those are well honed and incredible, and they can switch on in an almost a microsecond.
Yeah.
What we find when we start looking at kind of stress circuits in the brain and the way the nervous system is set up within us is that we're not designed to be in this stress state all the time. Emotions, we now know, should last about 90 seconds, unless there is an ongoing danger or an ongoing trigger for that emotion. And therefore, emotions should be a kind of, I don't know, a kind of a signal that goes, hold on a minute, something's happening. This body has come across something similar in the past, and this is how you should respond to it in the current. Um, when we're not in that stress state, when we're not in a survival response, and by the way, most people are in a survival response today, we can then access this beautiful state, which I would term playfulness, which suddenly shifts everything. It shifts our outlook on life. We go from being pessimistic in a survival response for good reason. You don't want to be optimistic when you're being chased by a lion, to playfulness where you can be optimal. You can look out to the future with joy.
Yeah.
And so it's very much linked to kind of positive emotions. Um, Again, I have to be careful here because sometimes people go, oh, okay, this is just about positive thinking. It's not. It's a state that your system is in that naturally gives rise to positive affect.
Yeah.
It changes how you see the world. Normally, if you're in a highly stressed state, you're rigid and defensive. In a playful state, you can be abstract and you can be connected. So kind of putting this on this spectrum, I think then when we come back to those three pillars, we suddenly start to see, and everyone has this, and this is probably a good little thought experiment for everyone listening, is you can identify moments where you've been highly stressed, and actually you can, if you're honest with yourself, if you're prepared to do that, lots of people aren't prepared to do that, but if you're honest with yourself, you can probably go, okay, yeah, in that moment, I was so fixated on this idea. I was angry, I was rigid, I was defensive. I probably wasn't a very nice person to be around. I had a pretty dim view of what was going on. I was completely caught up in it. And then there's other moments in life. And I used to be quite cruel when I spoke to audiences. This is as we kind of came through, just get out of the COVID-19. I used to kind of start seminars by going, "Oh, I want to just a quick test of the audience. I want you to put your hand up when I say the place where you have your best thinking." And the cruel part was, or the joke was, that I always started with the office and nobody ever put their hand up. And I found this kind of hilarious because it's the place where we now go to work and have our best thinking, and nobody ever has it. And as soon as you start saying the shower, the bath, the beach, on holiday, gardening, painting, all of a sudden everybody's hands shoot up as if I've uncovered some magic mystery. But because we identify that that's where we have our best thinking, because it's nothing to do with the environment we're in or the activity we're doing. Showers don't magically give us abstract thinking. What
Yeah.
happens is our nervous system changes and we downregulate to a point where we start to now play with reality. And it's that flow coming through. So playfulness is highly linked to imagination. It's highly linked to just letting things just flow through and you're able to see them with perspective. And it's also where those three pillars, so curiosity, we're highly curious when we're in that abstract state. We're highly creative. It's where we have our best thinking. And we're also highly connected to ourselves and others. We're not in a state of delusion, which we can be when we're at a highly stressed state, where it's all just about, I need to plow through. I don't care what you think or feel. I need to get my point across. And so hopefully putting on that kind of that nervous system spectrum and kind of where it shows up in life, to bring it all the way back. And then I promise I will finish at this point. To bring it all the way back. So the survival response kept us safe when a fellow, I don't know, a foreign tribe came to beat down our camp, or a lion came to the kind of the cave mouth. When we weren't in that state, we suddenly flipped back into playfulness. And playfulness was the bit that allowed human progress, allowed us to broaden our horizons, to go, I wonder what's beyond that forest to which we've never been. I wonder what happens if we stick a spiky rock on top of a wooden stick. Oh, we've got a spear. Those aren't stress response things. Those come from playing with what's around you, this state of playfulness.
Yeah. You mentioned there about how when you get into the detail of do this, do that, you're in a stressful position.
Mm.
And I think you said in that state you are deluded. Is that right? And it
You,
reminded
you, can,
me,
you certainly can be.
it can be, and it reminds me of some work that, or a lot of work that Ian McGilchrist has done. Are you familiar with him?
I'm
His
not.
left.
No, no.
Okay, so he talks about left brain, right brain. He has a wonderful book which is The Master and His Emissary. Now, the master is a right brain. The emissary is a left brain. The master is the one that knows what's happening. The left
Okay.
brain is the one that does the doing. But
Yes.
when the emissary gets to be so powerful,
Mm.
it gets to dominate, and yet it
Mm.
doesn't understand what it's doing. And it is the one that's deluded rather than the master.
Yeah,
And so
absolutely.
I loved what you were saying there because, delusion it's like a perspective in a way. That was a thought that came to mind as you were talking there.
Yeah,
It
and
was,
I think kind of I can take that slightly further in that, my understanding of this, my kind of thesis on this is that we're all deluded to some extent. Um, i.e., the phrase which is often kind of used within certainly the therapy space, the map is not the territory.
yeah,
And the idea being there is reality, and reality is out there. Well, we can test it in science and things, but we're not directly responding to that. What we're responding to is our interpretation of reality,
yeah,
and our interpretation is beautifully woven from this tapestry of experiences, of trauma, of overcoming trauma, of what our triggers from childhood, the scripts and narratives our parents gave us. I mean, we go on and on and on. But we are all deluded to some extent. What happens though is in that highly stressed state, we tend to narrow our focus, i.e., we're less accepting of bringing in new information, which for decision making is highly dangerous because now we're essentially running with a blindfold on, not
right.
caring what what new information comes at me because this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
Whereas when in a playful state, we're far more accepting. It doesn't mean we get everything right, but we're far more accepting of going, ah, that's an interesting way of seeing it. I haven't seen it that way at all. How does that affect my understanding of this? And all of a sudden, it's a different speed and it's a different quality of thought.
So let's bring this directly to leadership.
Mm.
Times are now enormously complex. There are ruptures, and many of the old leadership tools, models are failing us. Um, they don't seem to work anymore. Why? How do? Why is playfulness um, not only important but actually very relevant in this particular at this particular time? And where do you see it making real difference in organizations?
Great question. And I'm going to start by saying absolutely, I agree with you that the models of leadership we're running with are outdated. They're, for the most part, I see them as kind of just hangovers from the industrial era.
Yeah.
Most management and leadership is really about two things: reducing variability and increasing efficiency.
Yeah.
Um, that's the kind of the banging the drum of most corporate leadership. Um, there might be a sprinkling of kind of key phrases like human-centric and kind of people-centered,
Yeah.
which mean nothing other than kind of, yes, our employees are important, and without them, we wouldn't have a business. And those are factually true. But when you actually dig down into it, even a lot of the kind of the human-centered organizations are still digging into efficiency and reducing variability. That worked extraordinarily well for profits, and it worked extremely well in an era where it was all about mechanization and production,
Yeah.
i.e., you're producing the same thing day in, day out. You actually don't really want much of humanity in that setting. You want a robot. You want something that's going to show up, take as few breaks as possible, and just keep banging away at whatever, making rivets or washers or
Yeah.
whatever it might be. We're not in that kind of era anymore. I mean, business has changed. I mean, let's to quickly just kind of clarify that part. Most of the economy is now service industry. Most people actually are now paid to think, paid to come up with strategies and to be creative. They're not actually paid to just bang out widgets. But we've kept this old model of leadership as if it's the same thing. Um, and, and that's extremely dangerous because we're asking for a different output, but we're using the same measures and input.
Yeah.
So 100% agree with you. I think there's a few other elements going on here. Obviously, when you follow through in history. So my first book was called Decoding Change, and essentially what that was looking at was how is this world changing? I was working as an investment strategist for a small boutique investment firm at the time, and it was kind of one of the questions. People were watching the news, our clients were watching the news, and just going, "Well, where the heck did that come from? Didn't see that
Yeah.
coming." And the book isn't about trying to be a fortune teller because I don't think that's possible. But what you can do is if you really pay attention to the big cycles of change, i.e., innovation, technological cycles, demographics, the natural environment, regulatory cycles, you can start to see patterns. And what's really interesting of the point we're at today is not only we've had all this change and we haven't really updated leadership, but we're also at the point where people feel the pressure and the magnitude of change happening, not
Right.
just in their work, in every walk of life.
Yeah.
And that's because we're at this melting point of all these trends and megatrends intertwining, accelerating each other. We've already mentioned geopolitics. These things show up not haphazardly, but
No.
unsurprisingly, as companies essentially, kind of economic and military might change. We've had changes over the past kind of 20, 30 years. US exceptionalism isn't where it was in the 80s. Other countries are now rising to power. We could take the natural environment and talk a similar story. We could talk demographics and talk told a similar
Yeah.
story. The point I'm trying to make is we've got all of these changes going on. We haven't even mentioned AI, machine learning, quantum computing, all these other wonderful things. Um, and it's all adding to the pace and magnitude of change and the chaos that people are feeling. And
Yeah.
when you add into that this leadership imperative of reduce variability, increase efficiency, not only do the companies themselves risk missing out on whatever the new economy looks like, because the old one won't be here forever, but also they limit every single employee. So I often talk about within leadership circles, I take ROI, most business leaders will know return on investment. Actually, when we're talking about playfulness, it's return on intelligence.
Mm.
I've never walked into a company and what they're lacking is skilled people. They've got incredible people. They've spent months hiring these people, sometimes
Yeah.
actually trying to steal them from another organization. And then they sit them at a desk and they tell them, please don't think too much. Don't change anything, but we want you to revolutionize things. And and so what you see is you don't see a lack of skills or talent. You see a lack of kind of, well, lots of different things, but agency, of 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 kind of failure is a big word. That's normally buried. If there's any sort of failure that's never talked about, it's where we learn the most. Um, and so when you start to get to playfulness in leadership, what you're essentially doing is you're welcoming the human back into the workforce rather than just the biomass of our bodies, which is what was wanted in the industrial era. We're actually welcoming in people and all their quirks and everything else. And I know there'll be managers and leaders listening to this going, oh my word, I couldn't cope with that. That would be a nightmare. Yes, I want them here, but I don't want their individuality. But actually, when you set the boundaries around this, around kind of what's expected from a workforce, you don't need to set them so tightly that you tell them the path they have to walk as well. And that's often kind of the difference. We're not saying, okay, well, now people can just do whatever the heck they want to. But what you are saying is how you get there is up to you to some degree. And it varies between industry of how much that is possible. But playful leadership welcomes back the human. And I don't believe you can actually even start talking about person-centered leadership or human-centric leadership without understanding playfulness, because playfulness is the state the human is in when it's in a state of well-being. That's where we are. When we're at our best, when we're optimal, we're playful. We're able to reorientate. And actually what happens beautifully, we've talked a lot about kind of the individual benefits of playfulness as a survival response, but in a social setting, they're even more, they're magnified. And so there's a lot of research that we've got to draw on in terms of not necessarily in the workplace, but romantic couples. More playful romantic couples survive the turmoil of life because they're
Yeah.
able to always bring themselves back. They're able to co-regulate, to use that word, i.e., one person's state diffuses the tensions of the other.
Yeah.
And we see the same thing in groups and organizations. Truly resilient, adaptable organizations doesn't mean nothing goes wrong. It doesn't mean it's reserved for only the good times whenever, well, the sales figures are great and productions are wonderful and nothing's broken. Actually, where we see it fitting is when everything's going wrong. I'm going to quickly give you the example of Sir Ernest Shackleton. I don't know kind of whether you know the story, but obviously this was kind of, it's deemed the greatest rescue mission of all time. And
Yeah.
to give the 20-second intro for people who don't know, obviously we're on kind of 1914, I think it's the eve of World War One. Shackleton and his crew set off to essentially reach Antarctica and get to the pole. About 1,000 miles in through pack ice, disaster struck. The ship they were in, this wooden boat, got stuck and pinned in the ice, and the crew spent 10 months floating on the pack ice. The ship sunk. There was an 800-mile voyage they had to make in lifeboats across the oceans. I mean, it's just incredible. None of them died. That's the kind of the point. Like kind of these horrific conditions for months and months, weren't kind of prepared for it. None of them passed away. And when you read all the accounts of Shackleton, the thing he made sure that was not lost, he obviously didn't use the words playfulness, but he ran plays, you ran dog sled races, card games that they put on theatrical shows. Here we come back to those two things of play and playfulness. Play is different, 100%, because a lot of people are going, hold on a minute, that's not playfulness, that's play. Those are activities. Absolutely right. We can now use play as a catalyst to get us to change our state to be in a state of playfulness. Shackleton was a genius of this, and no formal training, no nothing, just naturally came to him. And when you read all the accounts of Shackleton, all his men talk about this ability for him to set an environment which they felt safe in, which they could reorientate. Where there's even a quote from him, kind of, "I'm looking for men who can laugh in the face of thirst and danger." That's not optimism, as it's often referred to. That's playfulness. Um, and so in the modern leadership world, I don't believe you can talk about kind of well-being, human-centered, person-centered organizations without understanding playfulness, because that's the state we are in when we're well. But it's not kind of a sacrifice to performance, and this is always the key point, is actually what we find is playfulness is highly motivating state to be in. Nobody needs to tell you to stay in playfulness.
Mm.
You're quite happy to stay there forever. Hence why actually video games are highly addictive. Um, it's a high performance state where you can think around corners. You can bring others into kind of reduce tensions and reduce anxiety. You build communities, not just teams. So that's how I see it. It's not doesn't change how leaders actually work. It just gives them an extra tool which allows them to see differently, to get to look at the team and go, okay, what's missing? If playfulness is missing, then essentially we know something's not working. That's the way I always put it.
Mm.
Because if everything was working, this would be a naturally playful environment where people would love to turn up to work, and actually it becomes an enriching experience, not just something they do for a few years and then retire.
It seems like a mindset that's viscerally embodied, or
Mm,
if when viscerally embodied, can impact on decision making, leadership development, strategy, learning, team dynamics, conflict, even
yes,
as well as innovation.
100%. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%. And I think that's one of the really big avenues for playfulness. Certainly, as we kind of let's bring some of the bits together that we've talked about in this world of uncertainty, chaos, disruption, change, whatever words you want to throw in there, and they're all far too overused and mean nothing anymore. But this state of basically the snow globe is being shaken, um, then that's highly unsettling, and that's built into our nervous system. We don't actually like uncertainty. Um, there are very few people who really, really do. Most people like some kind of familiarity. Uh, they like to control what's going on because this brain is essentially designed to do that. Is to get you through life, to keep you alive. And if something is uncertain, it goes, "Oh, I don't know how to do it." That's the environment which is going to be around us. And my personal view, with all these trends and megatrends which I've already talked about, I think that we're at the start of this disruption period, not nearing the end.
yeah.
And in that environment, we have to therefore build teams and organizations which provide a sense of safety. Absolutely, psychological safety is talked an awful lot about. But psychological safety isn't the end goal. That's just kind of a basic foundation. When we build playfulness into those teams, as you said, all of a sudden, you might come to work and be having a shocking day. But if you come into a playful environment, so comes back to that pillar of connectedness, everyone picks up on it, not in a way of kind of like, oh my word, stay away from Greg. He's in a foul mood today. But in a way of just understanding, and you get this kind of I'm going to use a strange phrase maybe for everyday use, but somatic resonance, i.e., we give off from our bodies language and tone and everything else. Yes, we communicate through that, but we actually pick up on where other people's nervous systems are firing. If you've walked into a room, and everyone's done this, so I don't know why I say if, in the past, when you've walked into a room, your nervous system is so sensitive and so accurate that it can instantly pick up on this isn't safe, this is safe, this is fun, this is very serious. And we
Yeah.
know before we've even formed a thought or uttered a word how to behave. And therefore, that's one of the keys of playfulness is you're building an environment where people just kind of are able you're able to be more vulnerable when you're playful, partly because you're removing yourself just 1 degree above reality. So in therapy, playfulness is used an awful lot in terms of metaphor and story because it's highly emotional material that you can't go directly to because you would have such a physical and psychological response to it that it would essentially put you in some form of psychosis sometimes. But you can talk about it in metaphor, or you can talk about it in story because it's not doesn't feel quite real. What you're doing is you're still talking about the real material underneath, but it's just so far removed, just enough that it's acceptable. And so this is what you see. You see a reduce of tension, you see a reduce of anxiety, you see a reduce of stress in playful teams and playful people. And the beauty is that in those groups, they help each other get there. It's
Yeah.
not that there has to be one leader who's playful. It's built into the team itself and its DNA.
Yeah. Now, okay, so we've been talking here about playfulness within a leadership setting, within a corporate setting, company, business. What about playfulness with self?
Okay.
Because, we talk a lot about relationships and communication with other people, but the most essential relationship we have is the one that we have with ourselves.
Yeah.
And the communication and the dramas that are happening inside here are ones that, yeah, I think I can reflect on what you've been saying and say, well, when I take a playful approach to my issues,
Yes.
I find solutions beginning to present themselves. How
Yeah.
can and also one other thing you mentioned a moment ago was trauma.
Mhm.
So trauma, I know is quite a significant and common driver for people in business. Um, how how can playfulness help with the personal experience of being in business?
Um, so I'm going to take that self part first, and
Yeah,
again I'm going to kind of deliver an experience from psychotherapy of what I see happening in that kind of room because I think what it'll do is while it is a psychotherapy kind of story, I think people will see the applicability and the generalizability of it into their own lives. Because essentially, within the therapy room, you tend to be dealing with people who, for whatever reason, whatever unfortunate situation or circumstance, they have got themselves stuck in a particular state that normally isn't very productive, isn't very pleasant to be in, whether we call that depression or trauma or PTSD or a multitude of things. What I've seen is, I'm going to give a slightly different version or definition of playfulness, is I would say the opposite of playfulness, and this is another way to think about it, is actually depression. Depression is where life has lost all its color. It's black and white thinking. It's rigid. It's on or off. The future is it's something out there, but there's no joy to get towards it. It doesn't hold any opportunity in the state of depression. You're stuck. You're rigid. Your thoughts are the same, often very negative. When we come to playfulness and the experience of playfulness, we suddenly add back in the color that it isn't on or off. Our thinking isn't black or white. Actually, we see the spectrum. We see the multitude of things, of options, of possibilities. The future is joyous and actually something we want to move towards. And so bringing this to self, I think everyone can probably relate to that because whether we talk about clinical depression or just depression that everybody feels at some point in their lives, where they're just kind of, oh my word, I'm in this kind of like this state where everything is just, ugh, that's depression, really, isn't it? That everyone's got some experience of. And absolutely, what you said before was we're presented with these problems in life, and playfulness, if we're able to get ourselves back to that state, and it is a skill as much as something that we know how to do. If we can get ourselves back to a playful state, all of a sudden, it's kind of like undoing the Gordian knot. It's not an instant shift. You're in a mess. Something's going wrong. It's not, oh, I'll find playfulness. Oh, isn't life wonderful again? But it just allows you to loosen things a little bit and go, oh my word, I didn't notice the this was there. I didn't notice that was there. And it's those little bits which suddenly open up possibilities, and you start to work with it rather than with the Gordian knot. You tighten it even further. So that's how playfulness kind of operates within us, and very much linked to post-traumatic growth. When something bad happens, the very playful person, because I mean, let's bring this back. Most people will experience trauma of some kind in their life. It doesn't necessarily mean that most people will experience post-traumatic stress.
Okay.
Actually, we don't know the percentage, because those who don't experience any negative symptoms don't tend to come into therapy or don't approach a research team and go, hold on a minute, I've had some trauma and I was fine. We only know those who experience trauma and then unfortunately need the help to get out of it.
Yeah.
But there is both options, and it happens. And a very much linked to that is how well people are able to step back, to almost dissociate to some degree, to see it from a greater perspective, and actually just go, okay, this is, I'm sorry, I don't know what language I can use on your podcast, so I'll keep it very clean. This is awful.
Words like that have been used before.
Okay. Well, this situation in it is shit. It's absolutely terrible. But, if I can rotate it, I can do this, I can do this, then over time it changes. That's very different to being stuck in that kind of that state of stuckness. So playfulness, and I will go into give people just this kind of like very, very simple procedure, method which I kind of developed
Please.
in a second. But yeah, if you can get yourself to playfulness, and it's not an overnight thing, it's not an instant thing, but if you can just work it in there, you start to find that life changes. And one of the best ways is actually just start doing things differently, because what playfulness it isn't living life on autopilot. And people are amazed at how, we don't think about it, but we live so much of our lives on autopilot because it's efficient. The brain wants efficiency. So we drive the same way to work. We brush our teeth in the same way. We always finish the night with a cup of tea or a glass of wine, or whatever it might be. We have all of these programs that we just run. And sometimes you can get kind of years on and go, oh my word, like, what have I done? Like I've kind of missed life. Playfulness is the opposite of that. Playfulness is going in there and disrupting. And what you find is the more you actively disrupt your life, the more you expand your tolerance for disruption. And so when the world presents disruption to you, you've got a greater container for it to sit in. Doesn't mean that it's any less stressful, but you've just got a greater ability to tolerate it.
Yeah.
So one of the exercises I do with an awful lot of normally my coaching clients rather than psychotherapy clients is, so I developed a method called the PPM method, which is pause, play, move. And it's essentially, if you find yourself trying to make big life decisions and you're not in a playful state, that to me is a huge red flag. And the best thing you can do is to step away from the table for 2-3 minutes. We unfortunately don't all have the ability to go, I'm going to take a holiday, I'm going to go and do something. Life doesn't present those opportunities for most people. And so taking some of the things I learned from being an athlete, I developed the PPM method, pause, play, move, as a 3-step method to try and get us back into a playful state very quickly. And the more you practice it, the quicker you can get at it. To the point that I've got clients who can do it in 90 seconds from a highly stressed state. Remember, emotions are meant to last 90 seconds. That's the natural kind of path, unless there's something re-triggering it. So the pause is literally that. We hate the word pause in the modern world because it sounds so unproductive. But it's not the same as stopping or quitting. Pausing is literally just kind of going, Take a deep breath, step back. Okay. Acknowledging actually, I'm highly angry here. I'm being triggered by whatever this is. And once you kind of acknowledge it, often people find the emotion lets go slightly because that's normally the thing that's causing the stress is this emotion is rising. The body's trying to go, hey, Greg, like pay attention. This is life threatening and everything else. And as soon as you give it that attention, it goes, okay, well, I've done my job. I'll kind of settle back down. So that's the pause. And once you've gone through the pause, actually, what happens is inside you, your nervous system is downregulated. And it allows you to start shifting towards playfulness. And normally what I do is I work with clients to try and find what I'd call playful anchors, i.e. situations, people, places which naturally you can recall that are playful in themselves. And actually just kind of bringing that anchor into focus. Once you've downregulated, you can't do it when you're stressed because remember, those two things are at opposite ends of the stress spectrum. But once you've downregulated, you can find playfulness. And even if it's just 10% more than you had before, my word, it's more than a 10% better decision at the end. And that's the move is, okay, once you've gone through the pause, once you've refound playfulness, now you can move. Now you can make the decision. Until then, just please step away from the table. You're not going to do anyone else or yourself any favors. So that's how I see playfulness with self is it comes to awareness and it comes to this kind of untangling. It's not necessarily a fast process, but it kind of teases things apart when they feel completely impossible or stuck.
Well, that is probably a very neat segue into playfulness in geopolitics, because I did mention it at the top. It appears to me that I was hoping to challenge you with geopolitics politics as being something, and I had this idea of the leaders of in Davos building who can build the highest crane with, as you say, spaghetti and marshmallows. But it's not about that at all. And actually, what you described there about pause, play, move
Yeah.
is probably exactly what is best applied in the geopolitical scene at the moment by our leaders.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got so many things kind of moving. In geopolitics, again, I always kind of tell people actually the pause phase, step back and just look at actually what's going on. The 24-hour news cycle is probably like the least nutritious place you can get information from because
Yeah.
it's designed to trigger you in some way so that you pay attention. Again, they're harnessing your survival and stress responses in a different way, most journalists. Because let's be honest, if you saw a headline going, everything at X company is going really well, you go, great, I'm not interested. But if you read a headline going, 9 things you need to know, otherwise you'll die, you're like, even if I know it's clickbait, it's kind of like draw in, oh, I should probably read that in case I don't know one of the 9. And so, kind of coming back to that is absolutely most of the news cycle is designed to actually invoke that survival stress response, not the playfulness side, the life threatening. I must find out more about this. So in geopolitics, absolutely, you've got all this going on. You've got all this posturing going on. It's fearful anyway as a citizen, like watching these people, these kind of so-called leaders. I'm going to put them in that camp. Who often aren't really in control of their own emotional state. They're acting from highly emotional decisions. They're certainly not following the PPM method. They do well to do so, and therefore the decision making at the end is normally highly flawed and highly biased. Actually, if they could, as you said, if they could come back and actually just go, do you know what? Just give me a few minutes. I'm going to pause. I'm going to find some playfulness, and then I might be able to actually take on board your point of view as well and find the common ground. And it's not always about kind of de-escalating. There's sometimes a reason to fight for things. But I believe there's always a reason to try and see it from somebody else's perspective first. And when you're in that highly defensive position, whether you're a world leader or just somebody sat around a board table, when you're in that highly stressed position, you're not interested in what other people have to say at all. You've got an agenda and you want to run it. And the same filters through into the geopolitical space, certainly at the moment.
This is a very beautiful conversation, Chris, because it's very resonant with metaconscious leaders. Metaconscious, one of the ways of thinking about metaconscious is a higher level of awareness, a higher
Right.
level of being, in which we perceive a bigger vision. We are less attached to, less committed to specific belief structures or understandings or perceptions of what we believe is. I had a conversation with Sean Mitchell on Metaconscious Leaders, and she talks about portals to transcendental leadership. Right.
Mhm.
And these can be meditation, but they can also be music. They can be dance. They can be creativity. There are a whole bunch of things. And this is a portal.
Right.
Playfulness is a portal to a higher level of awareness. It's letting go of a lot of stuff that we hold in our minds as being fixed, rigid, and fact, and says, no, hang on a second. What if this is a bit of a game? All sorts of ideas come into mind, whether it be um, we are but actors on a stage, William Shakespeare, or the concept of Maya in the Hindu religion of life is a play. It's a play that's happening on a stage, and we are participating in it. It's not who we are, it's our lived experience. And that's not meant to bypass it or to ignore the reality of suffering and so forth, but it gives a higher perspective that enables us to come back down into the wood, having got up at a higher level and seen what's going on, had a higher perspective, come down into it and deal with what we need to deal with
Mhm.
with greater wisdom. You also made a point a little earlier about what I see as being a liminal space between us. So there's my consciousness, there's your consciousness, and there's something in between, which is a collective consciousness, the group consciousness. And that playfulness begins to, and intuition is another word for this, begins to come into play when we bring down the walls of our rigidity, if you like, defensive-ness. This is my position, this is my belief, I am right. Suddenly I'm right. That means everybody else is wrong. So when we come in, so there's a lot of similarity in here, a lot of resonance. And I really feel that it's a ground that we need to go to handle the level of complexity that there is with us.
I think a lot of the points you've just brought out there, absolutely. Um, Interesting that you talked about that kind of space between. Um, Again, I would often describe it. One of the directors of the Playfulness Lab, Stephen Martini, he has this wonderful, very simple model of just two interconnected circles. There's me, there's you, and there's space in between. And that is very much. There's so much information in there that kind of we're giving off and we're communicating. And for me, it's not that there's an informational field so much. If some people do believe that, but more just that we don't pay attention to an awful lot that's around us.
Yeah,
And the more stressed we are, the less we can pay attention.
yeah,
Or at least we're very hyper focused on one specific thread.
yeah,
That our attention is narrowed, but hyper focused into one thing. Whereas playfulness, suddenly you start to pick up on more,
yeah,
and the conversation shifts naturally. And kind of some of the things you just pointed on there. I think some of the best conversations I've had with leadership teams is actually just doing very simple exercises, which sounds so basic, but kind of bringing out phrases which are invite playfulness, reduce tension, reduce the fear of judgment. It can be simple as like a leader, instead of just going, okay, well, work on that project and bring me a plan within the next week, to, okay, just go away and play with that. Instantly, it's the same command, but it's two completely different ways that person's going to
yeah.
approach life and
Because
work.
there's a subliminal interpretation of a word that goes into the mind unconsciously, isn't there?
Yeah.
Which carries with it a neurological instruction.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Chris, you've wrapped up all this wonderful insight and are presenting it through the Playfulness Lab, which you've established as a community interest company. Would you say just a little bit about what a community interest company is and why you've done that?
Absolutely. So the Playfulness Lab, um, the idea really was to get this message out to as many people as we can. I think it goes back to the start of our conversation. We've overlooked playfulness so severely that we've categorized it as something childish or something that we get to do in the smallest corners of our leisure time. And until we've kind of broken that kind of psychoeducation of playfulness, if you like, into actually playfulness is not something that we do when everything else is finished, but it's actually fundamental to everything we do if we wish to be a species that adapts to the challenges coming. I felt that was that was too an important message for it to strictly be a for-profit organization that tries to profit off this. I don't know whether that's a kind of thread of altruism or who knows, but something was in me that drew me to know it's got to be able to actually kind of generate a turnover to pay for the research and the training and everything else that we do. But I wanted all the profits to be reinvested back into it. And so the community interest company is essentially a version of a not-for-profit, that it operates under a limited company structure. It still charges for training and consultancy and workshops and things like that. But essentially, a lot of the profit is then locked within the company that has to then be reinvested for the purpose of furthering essentially the education of playfulness, both individually in teams and organizations. So that was the real mechanism. I wanted something that was really going to help the education of people rather than dismissing it.
Fabulous. A tagline that we have for Metaconscious Leaders is reframing leadership with a higher purpose.
Nice.
And you seem to have the higher purpose there very solidly baked in, not just to your behaviors and the product, but also into the structure and governance of the business. And I think there, as you've underlined, profit is vital, or is vital to make profit in order for the organization to survive,
Yes.
or and continue with its purpose. So the profit is not the purpose. The profit is simply a means to an end, and the purpose is one that you've identified. That's that's lovely. With an eye on the time, for those of us who perhaps already notice or sense that play is already knocking quietly at the door of our work, what's one small way that we might begin to invite a little more playfulness into our leadership practice?
I think the place to start is essentially, I think probably that thing I just gave an insight into before is just start with the use of language. It's the easiest, simplest, free place to begin. And the reason being is you just have to just become aware of kind of actually what is a phrase I'm delivering to my managers, to my staff, to my junior team, whoever. What is it that I'm actually communicating? Am I communicating one of efficiency and reducing variability, i.e., the hymn sheet of the industrial era? Or am I actually communicating that they have some agency, that failure isn't something to be afraid of, it's hopefully an iteration on the way to something better.
Yeah.
And it's therefore these really simple phrases. You don't have to suddenly turn the office into, I don't know, a circus or some carnival. In fact, most of those things normally backfire because people just feel awkward. But it's just about, I think the starting point is just kind of use those phrases, play with it. What don't you know? What if we flip this 100% right way around? I worked with a team who about 50 strong or so, and they'd gone through a rapid period of growth. And what had happened in that time is so common with fast growing companies is their culture had become quite toxic. And the result was they weren't sharing ideas. People were scared to share something because they were going to get beaten down. And so part of the workshop that we delivered for them was really looking at how do we open things back up. And the key exercise that we did a few times in a few different ways, and this might sound silly to some people, but talking about that Gordian knot, it's enough just to start loosening it, was some of the issues the team and company were facing, which weren't being resolved because nobody was willing to really share anything apart from a few people at the top. And I'm going to be very careful not to say any names of who this company is. um, Essentially, we had this exercise of what's the most ridiculous way you could solve the company's problem. and they worked in kind of teams of 6 to 8. And the brief was they had to solve the problem. It wasn't just stupidity, but they could go away and they could think up the craziest ideas. One team came up with, I don't know, like they were talking about kind of team meetings. One said, well, we'd all share something vulnerable if we, I don't know, we could all be shipped off to the Bahamas for a day. And, this was the setup and we'd be doing this. What they didn't realize, and what the point of all this was they were solving the problems through metaphor and story and imagination without realizing, without kind of being stuck in the trauma of the toxic environment that they were scared
Yeah.
of. And it was
Yeah.
enough just to shift it. And so really kind of coming back to the point is just that kind of use of language. Sometimes when you flip something on its head, it's a form of playfulness. You know, businesses don't approach things by going, what's the most stupid way we can solve this? Or what's the most ridiculous way we can solve this? They
Yeah.
start with the high pressure, high judgment phrase of what's the best way we can solve this? And so, yeah, use of language. And then from there, I think the world starts to open up and hopefully, people start to see the potential for this and, to blow the trumpet of the Playfulness Lab, hopefully people connect with us and we can then show them where to go from there and how to embed it in, because it does become quite individualistic in terms of the community and culture that's already in place and the climate that's already in place and the industry you work in. Some things can work in one industry and not in another, simply for the boundaries around those and the way things are done, the processes. But yeah,
I'm
I start with language.
I'm certain, Chris, that there'll be many people who will want to know more about what you do and where should they go? Where can they find out about you and get in touch?
I think probably the best place is just head over to the Playfulness Lab, and that's the playfulnesslab.com. Everything that we are currently doing, workshops, leadership courses, everything like that. My bio and kind of links to some of my stuff from the books I've mentioned are all on there as well.
Right.
But yeah, that's probably the place to head.
Excellent. Chris, this conversation has been an enormous pleasure, and my great thanks to you for being our guest today. I hope that we'll be able to do this again and we'll be able to welcome you back onto Metaconscious Leaders sometime in the future, not
I,
not too far away either.
I,
Um,
I would love that, Greg. That would be, yeah, thank you.
because there are certain areas which I would love to explore further, and particularly some of the other topics that we're going to be bringing into Metaconscious Leaders in the next 3 to 6 months. I think there's a great deal of synergy there which we could revisit and explore further. So until then, Chris, thank you very, very much, and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, what a conversation that was. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did and have gained plenty of good ideas about how to bring playfulness into your life and leadership practice. If you'd like to connect with Chris, you will find the links in the show notes below. Please subscribe if you haven't already done so to Metaconscious Leaders. This is so valuable for us as it enables us to reach a wider audience. And leave a comment as well. Share what you're thinking, because that also is very interesting. This is Metaconscious Leaders with me, Greg Seward. Thank you so much for watching and for listening. Until next week, be playful, stay present, and be well.